Alex Kennedy over at basketballinsiders.com says that Philadelphia is losing, but the future looks bright for this team that is 0-11, and for the third straight year appears that they are going to be, if not the worst, one of the worst teams in the NBA, Alex. But do you think it's all coming to an end soon for Sixers fans? Welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You got it. Well, a lot of people, this is a really polarizing topic. Some people are on board. Others think this is a scam, and this is that the fans are basically, getting strung along here. But do you think there is a light at the end of this tunnel sooner than later?
Yeah, I really do. I think this is a smart plan for the Sixers. I think that this allows them to potentially land multiple star players and get back into the playoffs and contention very soon. I think they realized that before they were in the middle of the pack when they had Drew Holiday, Thaddeus Young, guys like that. The best they were going to be was maybe the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. And when you talk to executives in the NBA, they often say the worst place to be is that 8th or 9th spot in the conference because you're just good enough to miss out on a difference maker in the draft, but just bad enough to miss out on the playoffs or the chance to contend. So I think Sam Hinkie came in there and realized that bottoming out was the best thing. With the NBA's current system, they almost incentivize that because, obviously they're going to give a top pick to the worst teams. So I think it makes sense. Obviously, you have to make the most of those draft picks when you get them. You can look around the NBA. There's plenty of examples of teams that were at the bottom of the standing, drafted someone or drafted a few players, and were able to be a contender very soon after that. And I think that's what Philly's trying to do.
Alex, I will say this. All right, I have been a proponent of the plan. I'm on board. John hates it, completely against it, and so we will certainly be back and forth on this one here. But I want to ask you this. Here's a team that's 0-11, and I will be the first to say, for them to be doing this for the third year, it's very frustrating because how in 3 years have they not taken a couple of steps? I understand what is going on ancillary around them. They have all these picks.
I'm too old to understand.
But is it frustrating to see that they still in 3 years have really only maybe 3 NBA talented players on that roster?
Yeah, that's frustrating. I mean, you definitely want to see progress each year. I think that's a big thing. So when I hear fans that are frustrated or hear from people that are upset about the plan, that's one thing that comes up. But I think also it is kind of reassuring because it shows that ownership's being very patient. It shows that, they're not just giving him 1 or 2 seasons to do this. They're saying carry out the plan, go ahead, keep doing this until we have a winning team. And really, if you think about it, if you do this long enough, at some point it's going to work. You're going to be able to find, a star player or two if you do this long enough. And if Philly is patient, it should work out for them. I think Jahlil Okafor is showing he could be a star player for them this year. Nerlens Noel is a terrific defender. He's showing progress on that end of the floor and on offense as well. Obviously, it was unfortunate to see Embiid get injured. Michael Carter-Williams, they traded him away because they felt like he wasn't the point guard of the future, and they felt like they were trading him when his stock was high, and it allowed them to get a potential top 3 pick. So it's interesting. I do think they wish they had players on that roster. I think also the fact that this is year 3 and they are still doing the same plan, it shows that there's patience and that they're going to take their time and make sure they can keep doing this until they can land the star players that will be a part of the next Sixers contending team.
Okay, Alex, now you're going to get the other side of the spectrum because I do not agree with this plan whatsoever. And one of the things I'm always disappointed in when I hear people talk about the NBA, and I covered the league for a long time as well, is when they use the term only. And this is the only way to do something. If a general manager comes into my office and I'm in the hiring process and he uses the term only, I don't want him to be my general manager. Now, this might be an NBA problem more than a Sixers problem, but do you find it an issue that so many people in this league have a groupthink mentality and think there is only one way to get better?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's definitely different ways to get better. You can get better through free agency, through trade. It's hard for certain markets, though. I think that there definitely was a different way for Philadelphia to approach this. They could have, kept Drew Holiday, kept Thaddeus Young, and kept trying to build that team together and see if they would attract free agents and climb the standings. But I think Sam Hinkie's belief was that team had maxed out their potential, that they weren't able to be a contender. At best, they would have been a 9th or 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. And at the end of the day, that's not good enough to get it done. So I think that's where that mentality comes from, that they had really, reached that point where they couldn't get any further. And look, Sam comes from an organization in Houston that doesn't allow tanking, that doesn't allow, losing games. You're not going to play young players. There were plenty of times where Sam Hinkie was in Houston, and if they would play the veterans, even if they were outside the playoff picture, they would never try to get a higher pick. So I think part of this is a reaction to what happened in Houston, how they had a very difficult time before landing James Harden and Dwight Howard of acquiring star players through free agency, and they would not tank. So I think Sam realized, okay, this is the way to get a star player, maybe multiple star players, and that's the approach now. But I agree with you, there's not only one way to build a team. We see around the NBA, there are plenty of ways to build a contending team. But for a team like Philadelphia and where they stood, I think this one does make a lot of sense, this approach.
But let me say this, Alex. Before Sam Hinkie, before this, and this is the first team to lose 9 consecutive games to start a season in NBA history, 2 straight years. This was one of the marquee franchises in professional basketball. And you have an entire generation of kids growing up in this league who don't know who Julius Erving was, never mind Wilt Chamberlain. Now this organization has destroyed its brand to the point no one will look at them to come here as a free agent. A lot of agents have said they don't want to deal with Sam Hinkie. They don't want to talk about trades. So those 2 aspects of trying to get better are off the table. Should Josh Harris be concerned with the general manager that has taken other avenues off the table?
Yeah, I think you definitely want to be careful. You don't want to upset agents, other general managers. I think a lot of fans understand it. I know there's some that don't, but I think a lot of fans understand it because they've done a really good job of being transparent and making it clear that there's a long-term plan. There are some franchises around the NBA where there's just dysfunction, there's no long-term plan, and year to year the fans have no idea what to expect. There's certainly franchises like that. So I think the fact that they've kind of spelled things out for fans has really helped. There's been some transparency. There are agents too that push their players to Philadelphia because they know there's going to be a lot of minutes there. They're going to get the opportunity to shine and touch the ball. Especially players that may not be playing on other teams. They're a rotation player in Philly. So there's certainly, some agents that like their players being on the Sixers. And yeah, I agree with you though. You don't want to upset people. You don't want to upset general managers. That's a big thing. And that's where if this goes too long, I think it does become a problem. If years from now we're still talking about the same plan, then people are going to be impatient. Fans are going to give up. And people around the NBA are going to get upset. And it wouldn't surprise me if at that point, too, the NBA makes some changes. We've already started to hear rumors that the NBA may change the lottery format, may change the system. Right now, the Sixers are taking advantage of the system. But if it gets changed, then that's where they need to change their approach as well.
Alex Kennedy, BasketballInsiders.com. It's a great article. He says the future is bright, even though the team is 0-11. Why is the future bright? Because a lot of times you would say, well, you get a good draft choice, but the draft doesn't always help you out. There's a lot of, the Sixers had the 2nd pick in the draft a couple of years ago, Alex. It turned into Alex Kennedy. It turned into Evan Turner, and that didn't help them out. Is this particular timing the right time for them?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to make the most of your draft picks. I mentioned the Thunder earlier. They're a team that did a terrific job. They tanked in. They were at the bottom of the standings, and they had an amazing run through the draft where they got Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Serge Ibaka. That's almost unprecedented in terms of how great of a job they did in that period drafting players. So there's no question you have to make the most of your draft picks. But I think that Philly's done a good job. I really like their front court of Jahlil Okafor, Nerlens Noel. Embiid is kind of a question mark at this point with his health and everything there. But, there's no question that he was being talked about as the number 1 prospect in that draft, or at least the number 2 prospect. And if he can get healthy, he obviously is a nice piece for them. And then the real reason I wrote that article is because I was looking ahead to this upcoming draft, and it's very possible that the Sixers could have 2 picks in the top 4. Their pick and then the Los Angeles Lakers pick, which is top 3 protected. And we see the Lakers, they're playing Kobe Bryant, they're playing their veteran players. We could see the Sixers have 2 top picks in this next draft. And this next draft is very, very good. You have a guy in Ben Simmons who is a facilitator. He's a 6'10", small forward. People are talking about him as having a superstar potential. There's some very good point guards, and that's obviously what Philadelphia needs. If they land, one of those guys or both, you're talking about a young core that suddenly is right there with Minnesota, Orlando, Utah as one of the best young cores in the NBA.
You wrote in the article about other teams, Cleveland, the Clippers, San Antonio, the Bulls, Washington. Washington's a team that growing up, I don't remember them ever being good. I mean, they were a down rotten franchise forever. They finally land their guy. They get Beal. Obviously, they had the number 1 pick, and they got Wall. And the next thing you know, they're a top 4 team. Who do you like in Philadelphia too? And do they remind you, or are they doing something so different? And as you just mentioned, I don't remember too many teams that are going to have 4 first-round draft picks, maybe 2 in the top 5. So they might have the opportunity to add stockpile more talent than these teams that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's pretty rare, and especially the way they've stockpiled picks. I mean, you don't see that usually. You know, some teams that were I mentioned in the article, they just struggled. They didn't necessarily tank. They just struggled and were bad for a few years, and they were able to land a few different players that helped them. You know, Milwaukee's an example of that. A few years ago, you know, they went and signed a bunch of veteran players, but they still ended top. You know, they had the worst record in the NBA because they just struggled. Their guys got hurt. It was a bad year for them. The Sixers, it's hard to compare them to anyone because they are, you know, losing games and not really fielding the team. And they've stockpiled picks. They've made a lot of trades to stockpile picks. You know, they'll take back a big contract if it means adding a pick. And that's pretty rare. You don't see that very often. I think the closest thing would probably be Cleveland without LeBron James, where they went on that run a few years in a row where they had, you know, a top pick, and they were able to bring in Kyrie Irving, Tristan Thompson, Dion Waiters, Anthony Bennett, Andrew Wiggins, just because that was a 4 or 5 year run where they had either the top pick or a top 4 pick. I think that's probably the closest comparison. And I mentioned that in the article. You know, the fact that they were able to get Kyrie Irving and those young assets allowed, you know, them to be able to attract LeBron James and then use some of those assets to trade for Kevin Love. So the Sixers are going to have they're going to be in a position where they have a lot of talent either to attract free agents or to trade those pieces for some very good players.
Alex, when you talk about the Cleveland comparison, though, to me, what throws that off the rails is the fact that was obviously LeBron is from that area. Obviously, he had a desire to go back. He has a love for the city. So that was a special circumstance. And despite the fact Cleveland had those picks, all those picks, they weren't a very good team. They were great when LeBron was there. They were bad when he was gone. They're great again when he's back. So at the end of the day, isn't the Sixers plan just hinged on getting one superstar? And unless it's Embiid or unless it's somebody coming from this draft, they've already had 4 shots at it and really haven't gotten it yet.
Well, I think also if you do get that star, it does become easier to attract free agents. You may not get a LeBron James, but another example I mentioned in the article is the Los Angeles Clippers. They were bad for so many years and a laughing stock of the NBA. Then they draft Blake Griffin, and suddenly they trade for Chris Paul. He decided to stay there long term when he didn't have to. He chose in free agency not to leave. And then now they're able to attract, you know, players every single summer. Guys want to go to Los Angeles, and it's become a destination where in the past people didn't want to play for the Clippers. Now they do. So I think in the NBA we've seen that getting 1 or 2 star players can completely change your franchise. You need stars to attract other stars. You need stars to win in the playoffs. So that's why I think this plan does make sense. I think Zula Okafor could be a star. You know, you mentioned Embiid in this upcoming draft. I think Okafor could end up being the best player to come out of this draft class. I was big on his game entering this season. I've been very impressed with his offense. And he's only 19 years old. If he's doing this right now at 19 years old without really much help around him, without any shooters around him, I'm excited to see how he develops. I think Okafor could be one of those star cornerstone pieces that you build around. And then if you are able to land another one in this draft, where if Embiid does develop into a very special player, that's where I think Philly has the young prospects to, you know, build a very nice team. And then if they have enough players and they have star players, other free agents, supporting members of the team, a supporting cast will come.
Alex Kennedy, Basketball Insiders, he says, trust the process, Sixers fans. Let's throw this question and how this enters the process. They're going to have the most cap room of any team in the NBA. Now, some people would kind of say, well, what are they going to do with that? How does that also factor in? I mean, I disagree with John in the thought that free agents aren't going to want to come. At some point, these guys are pretty smart, and they say that team's got 6 lottery picks on that team. They're going to be pretty good. I'd like to go there. If they're offering big-time money with all that talent, I can't see an agent saying, well, I'm not going to go there because you tanked. I can see him saying, that team's going to be pretty good, and they're giving you money. So how does cap space factor in?
Well, cap space is huge. I mean, at the end of the day, players are going to go where they get paid the most money. I've talked to enough players off the record to know that, they're not going to turn down more money from one team to go somewhere else. Now, there's some, obviously, exceptions to that, but for the most part, if you have a ton of cap space, you're going to be able to find players that will take your money and take the paycheck. So having all the cap space is huge for this team. Obviously, if they do keep drafting top picks, you're going to need some of that cap space and flexibility to keep those guys and sign them down the road. But part of the thing in the NBA, too, is that all these guys are going to be restricted. You have them locked up for a significant period of time. So they don't have to worry about, a guy like Okafor or one of these draft picks walking away. They're going to be able to keep them through restricted free agency, and they're going to have these guys for a long time. But the cap space is huge. I think that's probably the biggest thing here, that they've kept that flexibility, and, they have taken back contracts and taken back picks, but they really still have maintained that cap space. And that's a huge part of the plan, because once they do roll out their entire team, once Dario Saric is there, if Embiid is healthy, they have two guys from this next draft. If they start winning games, that's where the following offseason, players could be very interested. There's a chance to go there and be part of this young core. It becomes interesting. I do think that free agents would be interested in that team and would look at that team as a team that's on the rise and one of the better up-and-coming teams in the NBA.
The rebuttal, John?
The rebuttal, well, the salary cap issue is a problem, and that's one of the issues because this plan has gone on as long as it has. Originally, that meant a lot more, but now with the new television contract, the projected salary cap is going to explode, so plenty of other teams are going to have space also, and they will, in theory, be a better position to win. Second thing, talk about that, Alex. Second thing is Dario Saric. Now, do we overrate the draft too much? Because people assume that Saric is going to hit the ground running in this league. And I look back at the 2013 draft, and you can argue the Sixers got the best player in that draft. You can argue they got the best player in the 2014 draft. And you can argue they got the best player in the 2015 draft. But all of these drafts weren't that great. It's too early on the 15, I would suggest. But if you don't have the player in the right year, and Saric was, if you think about where Saric was taken at number 12, and all the, Nick Stauskas, that same draft was taken number 8. He certainly doesn't look like a star. So why are people so high on Dario Saric?
Yeah, great question. I'll start with Saric and then get back to the TV deal. Saric is someone who would have gone higher had he not, been forced to stay overseas for at least 1 year. That was a big thing in that draft. Everyone's talking about him as being one of the most talented players and talented prospects in that draft, but I think a lot of teams were hesitant. They wanted to get someone that could come over right away that they didn't have to worry about, negotiating a buyout for. I talked to executives that were just drooling over him and saying that he was a fantastic player, that he was a game changer, a potential star. He is a very talented guy, and we've seen enough film of him overseas, too, to know that his success should translate over to the NBA. So I think that he's a big part of this. People talk about the guys that are on the roster right now, but he's going to make that team a lot better. I like his game a lot, very versatile. And, again, I think he would have been a higher pick, higher than number 8, certainly, higher than Stauskas. I think you're talking about him as a top 5 guy, potentially, if he didn't have to stay overseas. And then, as you mentioned, the TV deal does change things. Now a lot of teams will have cap space, so there's more competition for free agents. But at the same time, a lot of these teams, they don't have the cap space that Philly does, where they could go sign multiple players. And that's where Philly, I'll go back to Cleveland and use them as an example. They had a ton of cap space because all they had was young players. So LeBron was able to say, okay, I'll go to Cleveland and pick my teammate. And he was able to say, we're going to go get Kevin Love as well. That's where, if you're Philadelphia, you have a bunch of young players, you could make a pitch to a star player and say, hey, go pick 2 teammates. You guys can all come over here. That's been the trend in the NBA lately, where guys want to go play with stars. They want to form a super team. Philadelphia, they're going to have more cap space than anyone. So while they may not be able to compete for one player as easily, they can put together a package deal pretty nicely and tell a player, go pick your teammates and add multiple stars that way.
Let me ask you this. Do they need to go that route, though? Let's say, for instance, Embiid, Okafor, Noel, if they get Simmons, Saric. I mean, essentially, do they need to make 2 or 3 guys come here? I mean, it sounds like where's all the minutes going to happen if these guys project the way that a lot of people think they might?
Well, yeah, ideally you'd want to build through the draft. You want to follow the Oklahoma City model and have all of your picks hit, and those are your starters. You build around that core for years to come, and then use free agency money to add players that are supporting cast members that can help those guys that are going to come in and complement your stars. So I think obviously that's the goal, but if it doesn't work out, it is nice to have that cap space to be able to fall back on and add multiple free agents if possible. I think it goes back to what John was saying. It's not only, you don't only have the one option. By maintaining that flexibility in that cap space, that's another avenue to add talent. So ideally, you'd want your draft picks to hit. If they can do that, and again, if they can get 2 picks in the upcoming draft, you can talk about having young talent at every single position. So I think that this really is an important year for them. This draft is huge for them because not only could they have 2 picks in the top 4, they could have 2 more picks in that first round, 4 picks total, because they have picks from Miami and Oklahoma City coming over too. So you're talking about just a ton of young players coming in next year, very good players, first-round talent. This is really an important year for Philly, and I think it's going to really affect what they do going forward. This is kind of the year to watch Philly and see how this is going to progress.
All right, Alex, let me ask you this question then. And Alex Kennedy's with us, taking a look at the Sixers' plan and the process. The article's over at basketballinsiders.com. We tweeted it out earlier. What's the timeline for you? If 3 years from now this team is still not a playoff team, did the plan fail?
Well, yeah, that's definitely 3 years from now. I think if they're still tanking and they're still losing this many games, then yeah, that's a problem. You want to see progress. Certainly 3 years from now. I think next year they should start winning some games. I think by then you should have Embiid healthy. You should have Saric over on the team. He should be, there on the roster. And you should have, like I said, 3 or 4 guys from that draft class that are first-round talent. If they can add a point guard, Jamal Murray and Chris Dunn are 2 guys that have been discussed as top picks. If they can get a point guard there, if they can get a guy like Ben Simmons who's supposed to be a star, next year you should start seeing more wins. Now, I don't think it'll be a playoff team next year, but you should see progress. And I think that's important. You want to see this team winning more games, looking more competitive. So I think next year really needs to be that year that they take that step forward. And then if they're able to win some games that year and look like a very good team, that's where, free agency comes in. That's where, people start talking about the Sixers in a different light.
Alex Kennedy, Basketball Insiders, he ends the article by saying, trust the process. John, did he tell you?
No, but Alex makes some great points. It's not about, and trust me, I understand the process. I don't trust the process. And I don't trust the process because of the guy making the decisions, not necessarily the fact. I agree with Alex. If you draft in the top 5 every year, sooner or later, you're going to get better.
Yeah.
You're going to hit. But I haven't seen the other aspects of Sam Hinkie adding talent, adding veteran talent to help the young talent learn how to be professionals. I just don't see it.
He's at yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I will say, too, I agree with you on that point, that they have not added the right pieces around the young players.
Yeah.
I look at Minnesota with Tayshaun Prince, Kevin Garnett, Andre Miller. I look at Orlando with Channing Frye, Jason Smith, T.J. Watson. Other teams have added veteran players around their young core, and that is very important as these guys develop. It helps them with their transition to the NBA, helps them learn. So I do agree. That's my biggest issue with what's happened so far in Philadelphia, that they haven't brought in some more veterans to teach the young guys. So I agree there.
Yeah, that's been my one problem with it, too. I agree with both of you there that I think they could have done a better job getting guys. Now, I guess the rebuttal would be, well, we're giving these guys playing time as opposed to having them sit on the bench. What's better, getting real NBA minutes and going through the growing pains, or having veterans around you, letting them get the minutes, and then having them work with you in practice? I guess that would be the catch-22 with that. These guys are getting real NBA minutes as opposed to sitting on the bench and letting Luke and Mabute take 28 minutes a night. So we'll see. 0-11. They play tomorrow night. You can listen to the game on 97.3. And Tom McGinnis has your cue to call coming up in about 5 minutes. Alex, great stuff, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.